I'm Allison, 29, and my fiancé James is 31. When we announced our engagement, I expected my parents' support, not destruction. At our engagement dinner, my mother Barbara stood up, glass in hand, and announced coldly, "We're not funding this circus." The room froze. My father Robert stared at his plate. 3 years of love and 2 months of engagement shattered in seconds. What I didn't know then, this wasn't about money at all. My mother had a different plan, one that would force me to choose between my family and the man I love. Before I dive into this emotional roller coaster, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself when it matters most. Now, let's get into how my perfect daughter facade crumbled under my mother's iron grip. My whole life, I was the golden child. I maintained a 4 gigapascals through high school, graduated summa cum laude from Cornell with a business degree, and landed a prestigious position at a Fortune 500 company by 23. Every choice, every achievement was carefully orchestrated to meet my parents' expectations. My room was lined with trophies, certificates, and medals, physical proof that I was fulfilling the destiny my mother had planned for me since birth. My sister Megan couldn't have been more different. 2 years younger and infinitely more rebellious, she dyed her hair purple at 16, dropped out of college to pursue photography, and traveled through Europe with just a backpack and her camera. My parents, especially my mother, treated her like a cautionary tale while holding me up as the family success story. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Mom would ask Megan at family gatherings, while squeezing my shoulder with pride. The favoritism was blatant and uncomfortable, creating a wedge between us for years. Behind my achievements was my mother's iron grip. She selected my extracurriculars, edited my college essays, and even steered me toward my major. "Business offers stability, Allison," she'd remind me, dismissing my interest in literature. "You can read novels in your spare time." When I wanted to study abroad in Paris, she convinced me that an internship at a local bank would look better on my resume. I always gave in. That's why meeting James felt like my first independent choice. We connected at a charity gala 3 years ago. I was there representing my company, and he was part of the architectural firm that had designed the venue. While my mother circulated the room networking, I escaped to a quiet balcony and found James admiring the city skyline. "Beautiful craftsmanship," I commented, nodding at the detailed balustrade. He smiled. I thought so too. That's why I insisted on hand-carved details rather than the molded concrete the client initially wanted. Our conversation flowed effortlessly from architecture to art, books, and dreams. James was passionate, genuine, and refreshingly honest. He'd built his career from scratch, working through college as a carpenter's apprentice before earning his architecture degree. His middle-class background had instilled values of hard work and authenticity that resonated with something long dormant in me. We exchanged numbers, and against my mother's carefully constructed social calendar, I made time for coffee dates and weekend outings with James. For the first time, I was prioritizing my happiness over my mother's expectations. James proposed on a random Tuesday evening as we cooked dinner together in his apartment. No elaborate setup, no photographer hidden in the bushes, just an honest question asked while chopping vegetables, the ring tucked in his pocket until that perfect, unplanned moment. I said yes immediately, tears streaming down my face as we danced around his tiny kitchen to music playing from his old Bluetooth speaker. When I called my parents with the news, my mother's response was notably tepid. "Oh, that's nice, dear. We'll have to discuss the details soon." No congratulations, no excitement, just strategic planning. I wanted a simple, meaningful wedding that reflected our values and relationship. Perhaps a ceremony in a botanical garden with close friends and family, followed by a reception with good food and dancing. Nothing extravagant or showy, just authentic, like us. The first sign of trouble came when my mother showed up at my apartment with Veronica Quinn, Boston's most exclusive and expensive wedding planner. "I've taken the liberty of securing Veronica's services," Mom announced, striding into my living room without waiting for an invitation. She's booked solid for the next 2 years. But she's made an exception for us. Mom, James and I haven't even discussed hiring a planner, I protested. Don't be naive, Allison. A Hartley wedding requires professional oversight. Veronica began talking about 5-figure floral arrangements and exclusive venues with year-long waiting lists that she could miraculously make available. When I mentioned including some of James's family traditions, my mother interrupted. We need to maintain certain standards, dear. The Quinn family has attended our events for generations. But this is our wedding, I insisted. A wedding is never just about the bride and groom, my mother countered. It's a social statement. When James arrived later that evening, my mother barely acknowledged him, speaking about him in the third person even while he stood right there. We'll need to get him a proper tuxedo fitting, she told Veronica. Nothing off the rack. I watched James' jaw tighten, but he remained polite. After they left, he took my hands. Allie, is this what you want? Because this feels like your mother's wedding, not ours. I reassured him that we would find a balance, but privately, I was beginning to worry. My mother had steamrolled over my preferences my entire life, and I had always acquiesced. Would this be any different? The comfortable routine of compliance was hard to break, even as I felt it strangling my happiness. Little did I know, my mother's control was about to escalate beyond anything I had experienced before, forcing me to make the hardest choice of my life. The engagement dinner was scheduled at Maison Laurent, a 5-star French restaurant where my parents had been members of the exclusive dining club for decades. My mother had insisted on hosting it there rather than the cozy Italian place James and I had suggested. The Hartleys announce engagements at Laurent's, she had said, as if reciting an ancient law. I spent hours getting ready, trying to look perfect to minimize any potential criticism from my mother. James picked me up in his 2-year-old Audi, which he had detailed for the occasion. You look beautiful, he whispered, squeezing my hand as we walked into the restaurant. Everything will be fine. The maitre d' led us to a private dining room where crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over the immaculate white tablecloth. My parents were already seated, my father nursing a scotch while my mother inspected the table settings with a critical eye. James's parents, Michael and Diane, arrived moments after us. The contrast between our families was immediately apparent. My father stood stiffly in his tailored suit, offering a formal handshake to Michael, who was wearing what was clearly his best suit but couldn't hide his working-class background. My mother air-kissed Diane's cheeks while subtly scanning her department store dress. Diane, how lovely to finally meet you, my mother said, her tone suggesting the opposite. What an interesting necklace. Thank you, Diane replied warmly, touching the handcrafted pendant. Michael made it for our 20th anniversary. He's quite talented with metalwork. How crafty, my mother responded with a tight smile. The first course arrived a delicate amuse-bouche that James's parents eyed uncertainly. Just a little palate cleanser, I explained quietly to Diane, who smiled gratefully. In our house, the palate cleanser was always a good joke between courses, Michael said with a hearty laugh. Instead of joining the laughter, my mother signaled the sommelier. I think we need more wine. As dinner progressed, the tension thickened. My mother monopolized the conversation, steering it toward topics that highlighted our family's status, the governor's ball they had recently attended, their upcoming Mediterranean cruise, the charity board my father chaired. And what do you do for recreation, Michael? My mother asked, emphasizing the word as if it were foreign. I coach Little League Baseball, James's father answered proudly. Been doing it for 15 years now. How energetic, my mother replied dismissively. Barbara volunteers with the Symphony Guild, my father added, raising his glass to her. James tried valiantly to bridge the gap. Did you know Michael built their entire sunroom addition himself? He's where I got my love of architecture. Is that so? I assumed you went into architecture for the prestige, my mother replied. I watched James's expression tighten. Actually, I went into it because I love creating spaces that become part of people's life stories. Well, not everyone needs to prioritize financial success, my mother said with a dismissive wave. Mom, I interjected, mortified. What? I'm complimenting James on following his passion, though I suppose someone has to design buildings for the people who own them, she added with a cold smile. The waiter cleared our entrees, and my father, attempting to ease the tension, raised his glass. To Allison and James, may your future be bright. Everyone clinked glasses. The momentary warmth immediately cooled when my mother said, "Speaking of the future, we should discuss the wedding plans." James's parents leaned forward eagerly. "We've been saving since James graduated," Diane offered. "We'd like to contribute what we can." My mother's eyebrow arched dangerously. "That's not necessary. The bride's family traditionally handles the expenses." "We insist," Michael said firmly. "We want to do our part." "And what part would that be?" my mother asked. 5%? 10? The Hartley name comes with certain expectations. The table fell silent. "Barbara?" my father warned quietly. "No, Robert, let's be transparent," she continued. "Veronica has provided an initial estimate of $150,000 for a wedding befitting our daughter." I gasped. "Mom, that's ridiculous. We don't want—" "Allison, you only get married once. At least one hopes so," she added with a pointed look at James. James's parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Mrs. Hartley," James began calmly, "Allison and I have discussed our wedding. We want something meaningful, not extravagant." My mother's smile vanished. "I see. So you've been poisoning my daughter against family traditions." "That's not what he said, Mom," I interjected. She ignored me. "Perhaps it's time to be completely honest. Robert and I have concerns about this union." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "What concerns?" I demanded. My mother set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. "James comes from a very different background. We've built a certain life, certain connections. Marriage isn't just about love. It's about compatible values and goals." "We have compatible values," I insisted. "Do you?" "His father builds sunrooms and coaches baseball. We sit on charity boards and attend governor's balls. These worlds don't mix, Allison." James's parents stiffened, their faces flushing with humiliation. "That's enough," I said, my voice shaking. "No, it's not," my mother countered, her voice rising. "Since you insist on this mismatch, I think you should know that your father and I have reconsidered our position on financing this wedding." My father stared intently at his plate, saying nothing. "What does that mean?" I asked, though I already knew. My mother stood up, glass in hand, looking down at all of us with cold authority. "It means we're not funding this circus. If you insist on marrying beneath your station, you can do it without our checkbook." The silence that followed was deafening. James's parents sat frozen in shock. My father continued examining his plate, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. James reached for my hand under the table. "I think it's time for us to leave," James said quietly, standing. "I believe that's best," my mother replied. James helped me to my feet as I fought back tears. His parents stood awkwardly, Diane clutching her purse with white knuckles. "Thank you for dinner," Michael said stiffly. "We apologize for any offense we've caused by existing." We walked out in silence, the maitre d' watching curiously, as our party exited mid-dessert. In the car, I finally broke down. "I'm so sorry, James. I'm so humiliated." He drove in silence for several minutes, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Your mother has no right to speak to my parents that way. They've worked hard their entire lives." "I know," I sobbed. "I don't understand what happened." My phone buzzed with a text from Megan. "Are you okay? Mom's been plotting this for weeks. She hired a PI to investigate James's family. She never intended to support your marriage. Call me." I stared at the screen in disbelief, the pieces falling into place. My mother's lukewarm response to our engagement, her insistence on taking over the planning, her dismissive attitude toward James's family. "It wasn't about money," I whispered, showing James the text. "She never wanted me to marry you at all." James pulled the car over and turned to me. "Allie, I love you more than anything. But I need to know, are you going to let your mother decide your future? Because if she can break us with one dinner, We have bigger problems than wedding finances." I looked into his eyes, feeling the weight of 29 years of compliance crashing down on me. For the first time, I saw clearly what was at stake. Not just my wedding, but my entire life. "No," I said finally, my voice steadier than I expected. "I choose you. I choose us." Little did I know how high the cost of that choice would be. The next morning, I drove to my parents' colonial-style mansion in Beacon Hill, my stomach in knots. The house where I grew up had always intimidated me: pristine white carpets, antique furniture too delicate to actually use, and family portraits where everyone's smile looked rehearsed. Today, it felt like entering enemy territory. The housekeeper, Maria, let me in with a sympathetic smile. She'd been witnessing my mother's controlling nature for 2 decades. "She's in the living room," Maria whispered, squeezing my arm before disappearing into the kitchen. My mother sat perfectly poised on the Victorian settee, flipping through a society magazine. She didn't look up when I entered. "I wondered when you'd come," she said, turning a page. "Tea?" "I didn't come for tea," I replied, remaining standing despite the chair she gestured toward. "I came for an explanation." She finally looked up, her expression cool and composed. "I think I was quite clear last night. You humiliated me, you insulted James's family, and according to Megan, you never intended to support our marriage. Why?" "Sit down, Allison. You're being dramatic." I stayed where I was. "No more deflections, Mom. I want the truth." She sighed, setting aside her magazine. "The truth? Fine. James Clark isn't suitable for you. He may be charming and attractive, but he lacks the background, connections, and ambition that would make him an appropriate husband for a Hartley." "That's ridiculous. He's a successful architect at a small firm, designing municipal buildings and middle-class homes," she interrupted. "Meanwhile, Gregory Whitman has been asking about you for years. His father sits on 3 corporate boards with your father. The Whitmans have a summer house in Nantucket right next to the Pierponts. That's the kind of connection that elevates a family." The mention of Gregory Whitman, a boring investment banker I'd met at several society events, made my blood boil. "So this is about social climbing? I should marry for pedigree instead of love?" "Don't be childish, Allison. Marriage in our circle has always been strategic. Your father and I may have grown fond of each other, but we married because it was advantageous for both families." "That explains a lot," I muttered. My father chose that moment to enter the room, looking uncomfortable in his own home as usual. "Robert, good timing," my mother said. "Perhaps you can talk some sense into your daughter." My father cleared his throat nervously. "Barbara, maybe we should reconsider." "We've discussed this," she cut him off sharply. "We agreed." I looked between them, realizing my father had been complicit in this scheme. "Dad, you went along with this?" He couldn't meet my eyes. "Your mother feels very strongly that I should control who my daughter marries?" "Yes, I do." She stood and walked to a side table, returning with a manila folder. "Before you throw away your future on some romance novel fantasy, you should know exactly who you're choosing." She handed me the folder. Inside were detailed reports from a private investigator, financial records, family history, even photos of James meeting with clients and colleagues. "You had him investigated?" I asked, horrified. "Of course I did. That's what responsible parents do." She pointed to a document. His father declared bankruptcy in 1997. His mother worked as a waitress to put food on the table. His uncle on his mother's side had a drunk driving conviction in 2005. "These are normal people who faced challenges and overcame them," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Unlike you, who's apparently never faced a real problem in your privileged life." "Don't take that tone with me," she snapped. "I'm trying to protect you from making a catastrophic mistake. The only mistake I've made was thinking you actually cared about my happiness. I care about your future, which is more important than temporary feelings. Love fades, Allison, but social position is permanent." I gathered the papers and shoved them back into the folder. "You know nothing about love. My relationship with James is more real than anything in this house." "Then make your choice," she said coldly. Either end this inappropriate engagement or forget about our financial support, not just for the wedding, but for everything. The trust fund, the connections, the security. All of it. Barbara, my father interjected. Surely we don't need to go that far. Stay out of this, Robert, she hissed. You've always been too soft. I looked at my father, who immediately retreated into silence. All my life, I'd watched him surrender to my mother's domination, and I suddenly saw my future if I gave in now, a lifetime of capitulation, of stifled dreams, of watching my own children bend to unreasonable demands. You can keep your money, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I choose James. My mother's composed facade cracked slightly, revealing genuine shock. She hadn't expected resistance. Don't be foolish. What kind of life do you think you'll have? Where will you live? How will you maintain your lifestyle? I'll have a life built on love and mutual respect, which is more than you can say. And I have a career, Mom. I make my own money. A career I helped you establish, she countered. One call from me to Richard Pemberton, and your position at the firm becomes very precarious. The threat hit me like a physical blow. You would sabotage my career out of spite? I would do whatever necessary to prevent you from throwing your life away on a man who will drag you down to his level. I took a deep breath, fighting back tears. You know what's truly sad? James's parents, who you look down on so much, would never do this to him. They support his choices because they actually love him. This emotional display is exactly why you need guidance, she said dismissively. When you've calmed down and thought rationally, you'll understand I'm right. I understand perfectly, I replied, turning to leave. You don't love me. You love controlling me. My father finally spoke up. Allison, don't say things you'll regret. I paused at the door. I'm not the one who should have regrets, Dad. You've let her control everyone's lives because you're too cowardly to stand up to her. I feel sorry for you both. As I walked out, my mother called after me. If you leave now, don't expect to be welcomed back until you've come to your senses. I got into my car and sat there for a moment, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Through the living room window, I could see my parents arguing, my father gesturing emphatically, while my mother stood rigid with anger. For the first time in my life, I had directly opposed my mother. The weight of 29 years of obedience had lifted, leaving me terrified but strangely exhilarated. I started the engine and drove away, not looking back at the house that no longer felt like home. The bridges weren't just burned, they were obliterated, and I had no idea what waited for me on the other side. The weeks following my confrontation with my parents were like watching dominoes fall throughout my extended family. Everyone seemed to have an opinion on my engagement, and neutrality wasn't an option. The first surprise came from my sister Megan, who showed up at my apartment with a bottle of wine and takeout. I figured you could use this, she said, pushing past me into the living room. Mom's on the warpath. I hadn't spoken much with Megan in years. Our mother's favoritism had created a rift between us that seemed unbridgeable. Yet here she was, pouring wine into coffee mugs because I hadn't unpacked my glasses yet. I'd moved out of my parents' subsidized condo into a smaller apartment I could afford on my own. Why are you helping me? I asked cautiously. You've never even met James. Megan sighed, tucking her now blue hair behind her ear. Because I've been where you are, choosing your own path over Mom's grand design. It sucks, and nobody should go through it alone. That night, Megan revealed how our mother had sabotaged her college scholarship by calling the dean and claiming Megan had psychological issues that made her unsuitable for academic pressure. It was why she'd dropped out, not because she was irresponsible as I'd been told, but because our mother had deliberately undermined her independence. She can't stand not being in control, Megan explained, and she's ruthless when challenged. Megan wasn't the only surprise ally. Aunt Patricia, my mother's younger sister, called me privately. Your mother's behavior is unacceptable, she said firmly. Barbara's always been controlling, but this crosses a line. Roger and I want you to know we support you and James. The family group text soon became a battleground. Cousin Whitney posted, "So excited for Allison and James. When's the new date?" Only to have my mother respond, "There won't be a wedding. Allison's going through a phase of rebellion. I left the chat after Uncle Stephen, my mother's loyal devotee, wrote, "Marrying beneath your station only leads to resentment. Barbara's just being practical." The real devastation came during my grandmother's birthday celebration. I'd been hesitant to attend but couldn't bear disappointing Grandma Ellis, who at 85 deserved to have her family around her. James offered to skip it to avoid tension, but I insisted he come. He was my future, and I refused to hide him. We arrived at the country club to frigid stares from my mother's side of the family. My mother herself was holding court near the cake table, describing her recent fundraiser success to a circle of rapt relatives. When she spotted us, her smile hardened but didn't disappear. During dinner, my mother clinked her glass. "Before we toast to Mother's birthday, I have a sad announcement. Franklin Academy has withdrawn their offer to name the new science wing after Father, despite our substantial donation." Her eyes found mine across the room. Apparently, one of the board members was contacted by someone claiming our family engages in manipulative business practices. The same board member's son works at Porter and Schmidt Architecture, where James is employed. Such an unfortunate coincidence. The implication was clear. She was blaming James for the lost naming opportunity, a meaningful tribute to my late grandfather. James's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Later, in the bathroom, I overheard my cousin Vanessa talking to Aunt Helen. "Barbara says James is only after the Hartley money. Apparently, his firm is struggling, and he targeted Allison at that charity event." "That's not true," I said, emerging from the stall. "James doesn't even know about my trust fund. Mom's making up lies because she can't control me anymore." They exchanged uncomfortable glances and hurried out. When we left, my grandmother pressed a fragile hand to my cheek. "Stand your ground, dear. Barbara was always too concerned with appearances. I married your grandfather when he was just a teacher, you know. The money came later." This revelation stunned me. My mother had always described my grandparents' union as an advantageous match between prominent families. The attacks became more direct and damaging. I received a call from my boss asking me to come to his office immediately. There, looking uncomfortable, he explained that a board member had raised concerns about my judgment and stability based on information from a reliable family source. "Are you firing me?" I asked incredulously. No, he assured me. "But the Wilmington project is sensitive. The board feels someone with less personal distraction should take the lead." The Wilmington project was my biggest achievement, a multi-million-dollar development I'd secured and managed for over a year. Being removed was a devastating professional blow. That evening, James held me while I cried. "She's trying to break you," he said softly. "To prove she's right, that you need her to succeed." "Why can't she just let me be happy?" I sobbed. "Because your happiness on your own terms threatens her control," he replied. "My parents want to help Allie. They feel terrible about what's happening." James's parents had become a source of unexpected comfort. Despite their modest means, they'd offered emotional support without judgment. Diane called regularly with encouragement, while Michael helped us find a reliable used car when I had to return the company vehicle that came with the Wilmington project. The contrast between our families became more pronounced each day. While my mother orchestrated my social and professional isolation, James's family demonstrated what unconditional love actually looked like. The final blow came when I discovered that my mother had hired a private investigator not just to investigate James, but to follow us. Photos of us viewing apartments and meeting with wedding vendors were being shared with family members alongside invented stories about James's controlling behavior and my declining mental health. I found myself questioning everything: my childhood, my relationship with my parents, even my own identity. Who was I without my mother's approval? Without the Hartley name opening doors? For the first time, I was facing the world without the protective bubble of privilege and connections I'd taken for granted. "I don't know who I am anymore," I confessed to James one night. "Everything I thought about myself, my family, my life, it was all built on lies." James took my hands. "This is your chance to find out who you really are. the person you want to be, not who your mother demanded you become. It was a terrifying proposition, rebuilding my identity from scratch at 29. But as I looked around at what remained after my mother's scorched earth campaign, I realized I had something she couldn't take away: the freedom to choose my own path and people who loved me for myself, not for what I represented. That night, I made an appointment with a therapist. If I was going to rebuild my life, I needed to understand the foundation of manipulation it had been built upon. And I needed to make sure I didn't carry my mother's toxic patterns into my future with James. The family I was born into was fracturing around me, but from those broken pieces, a different kind of family was forming, one based on choice rather than obligation, on support rather than control. It wasn't what I'd expected, but for the first time, it felt real. 3 weeks after the confrontation with my parents, James and I sat in our favorite coffee shop, a small chalkboard between us. We'd created 2 columns: original wedding and new wedding. Under the first column was a single item: parents pay. Under the second, a growing list of question marks. Maybe we should postpone, James suggested gently, seeing my overwhelmed expression. Give things time to cool down with your family. I stirred my latte, considering his words. Postponement was the rational choice. My professional standing was shaky after being removed from the Wilmington project. James's firm was solid but not thriving. My mother's social sabotage had eliminated several venues that suddenly became unavailable when I called. If we postpone, she wins, I said finally. She'll see it as proof that we can't manage without her, and she'll use the time to escalate, not reconcile. James reached across the table, taking my hands. This isn't about winning or losing, Allie. It's about us starting our life together the right way. That's exactly why we shouldn't wait, I insisted. I want to marry you, James. Not a year from now. Not when my mother approves, which will be never but as planned. We just need a new plan. He studied my face. You're sure? It's going to be harder than you're used to. That statement might have offended me once, but now I recognized its truth. I had never built anything without my family's resources backing me. I need to do this, I said. I need to prove to myself that I can create something meaningful without my mother's approval or checkbook. That night, we took inventory of our resources. Our combined savings came to $28,000, substantial, but far less than the $150,000 my mother had budgeted. My trust fund was inaccessible until I turned 35, or my parents signed a release, neither of which seemed likely. We could use the condo down payment fund, James suggested hesitantly. We'd been saving for our first home together. No, I said firmly. That's our future. We're not sacrificing it for one day. The next morning, I made a decision. I gathered the designer clothes, handbags, and jewelry my parents had given me over the years and contacted a luxury consignment shop. The items represented years of birthday and Christmas gifts, things I'd never really wanted but had accepted as the price of parental approval. The shop owner's eyes widened as I unloaded Chanel, Gucci, and Tiffany pieces. These are exquisite, she murmured, examining a barely worn Hermes bag. May I ask why you're selling? I'm investing in something more valuable, I replied. The consignment yielded $22,000, bringing our wedding budget to $50,000, still substantial, but with my mother's vendetta limiting our options, every dollar would count. James received unexpected good news that same week, a promotion to senior architect following his successful redesign of the Franklin Community Center. The salary increase wasn't enormous, but the validation and security it provided came at a critical time. I've been thinking, he said, as we celebrated with takeout on our apartment floor. We'd sold the dining table as part of our fundraising efforts. What if we stopped trying to create a traditional wedding? What do you mean? Your mother expects us to fail at producing the kind of wedding she thinks is appropriate. So let's not even try. Let's create something completely different, something that reflects us, not society expectations. The idea was liberating. We abandoned the country club venues and formal catering options in favor of more creative approaches. I started researching intimate garden settings while James sketched layout ideas. Our friends rallied around us in ways I never expected. My college roommate Zoe, now a graphic designer, offered to create our invitations and wedding website for free. James's colleague Ryan, an amateur photographer, volunteered his services. My coworker Tara offered her family's beautiful backyard property in the Berkshires as a possible venue. I took a wedding planning course, I announced to James one evening, showing him the online certificate. I'm going to plan this myself. He looked surprised. You've never shown interest in event planning before. I've never had the chance to discover what interests me, I realized aloud. My mother always decided that for me. The course taught me practical skills my mother's hired planners had handled: invisibly vendor negotiations, timeline management, budget allocation. I discovered I had a knack for creative problem solving and an eye for design that had never been encouraged. Each weekend became a DIY workshop. James taught me basic woodworking skills as we created signage and table decorations. I learned calligraphy for place cards and hand-painted table numbers. What began as cost-saving measures became opportunities for connection and creativity. I never knew this side of you existed, James said one Sunday, watching me arrange sample centerpieces from flowers I'd bought at the farmer's market. Neither did I admitted. My mother always said I wasn't creative. The wedding vision that emerged looked nothing like my mother's society extravaganza, but it felt authentically ours: a garden ceremony at Tara's family property, farm-to-table catering from a local restaurant where James had designed the renovation, vintage mismatched china collected from thrift shops, and wildflower arrangements we would assemble ourselves with flowers from a local farm. My mother's influence still cast shadows. 3 weeks after securing the catering, the restaurant owner called apologetically. "I'm sorry, but we need to refund your deposit. We've had a sudden staffing issue." I later learned through industry contacts that my mother had approached their primary investor with concerns about reliability issues. But for every door she closed, we found new ones opening. The restaurant's head chef, outraged by the interference, offered to cater independently with his team on their day off. "People respect authenticity," James observed. "Your mother doesn't understand that because she's never been authentic." The most unexpected ally emerged in my father, who requested to meet me for coffee one afternoon. He looked older, his shoulders stooped with what I now recognized as years of submission. "I have something for you," he said, sliding an envelope across the table. Inside was a check for $15,000, not enough to fund the original wedding, but significant nonetheless. "Dad, where did this come from? Won't Mom?" "It's from my personal account," he interrupted. "One she doesn't monitor. I've been maintaining it for years. Insurance, I suppose." He looked down at his coffee. "I know it's not enough to make up for standing by while Barbara does what she does. But I want you to have the wedding you want, Allison." I studied my father's face, seeing for the first time the cost of his decades of capitulation. "Why don't you leave her?" I asked softly. His sad smile contained volumes. "You can't understand until you've surrendered your autonomy inch by inch, year after year, until you no longer remember who you were before." His words chilled me. It could have been my future if I'd continued following my mother's path. "I'm proud of you," he added, his voice breaking slightly, "for having the courage I never did." The money allowed us to upgrade certain elements: better chairs, professional lighting, a honeymoon that wasn't just a weekend getaway. But more valuable than the check was the knowledge that my father, in his limited way, was trying to break free from my mother's control too. As our wedding vision took shape, I found myself happier with our $65,000 personal creation than I ever would have been with my mother's $150,000 showcase. Each element had meaning, each decision reflected our values, and every obstacle overcome strengthened our partnership. "I think I like planning weddings," I told James one night as we finalized the seating chart. "Not just ours, but maybe others? People who want something authentic instead of formulaic." He smiled. You'd be amazing at it. You've got the organizational skills and the newly discovered creative vision. Could I really start over? Build a new career from scratch? Why not? You've already proved you can build a wedding from scratch. A career is just the next step. For the first time since my mother's dramatic announcement at the engagement dinner, I felt genuine excitement about the future. Not just about marrying James, but about discovering who Allison Hartley really was when she stood on her own feet, making her own choices. What had begun as a crisis was transforming into an unexpected gift, the freedom to reinvent myself according to my own values rather than inherited expectations. As challenging as the journey had been, I wouldn't trade it for the comfortable imprisonment of my previous life. Our wedding was taking shape, but more importantly, so was I. 8 weeks before our wedding day, I received a disturbing call from Tara's mother, Linda. "Allison, I'm so sorry, but we can't host your wedding at our property," she said, her voice strained. "We've discovered a serious issue with the septic system that requires immediate excavation." "That's strange," I replied. "Didn't you just have it inspected last month for your daughter's graduation party?" A telling pause followed. "Yes, but these things can develop suddenly." After gentle pressing, Linda reluctantly admitted the truth. She'd received an anonymous letter detailing supposed code violations on her property that would be reported if our wedding proceeded there. The envelope contained photos of her home taken from various angles, clear evidence of surveillance. "I'm so sorry, dear," Linda said softly. "We can't risk it. We've been planning to sell next year, and any violations on record would devastate our property value." I hung up feeling sick. My mother had escalated from social manipulation to outright intimidation. That same week, our photographer Ryan withdrew, claiming a scheduling conflict. Our florist canceled, citing supply issues. The vintage china rental company that had confirmed our order suddenly claimed no record of our reservation. "She found out the details of our plans," I told James as we sat stunned in our apartment, surrounded by wedding planning materials. "But how?" The answer came from Megan, who discovered our cousin Emma, a frequent dinner guest at our parents' home, had been following our wedding planning Instagram account, which I'd foolishly set to public. Every update, vendor tag, and planning milestone had been reported directly to my mother. "She's systematically dismantling everything we've built," I said, fighting tears of frustration. "At this rate, we won't have a wedding at all." James put his arm around me. "Maybe we should consider eloping. Just us, somewhere beautiful, without all this stress." The suggestion was tempting. Every day brought new cancellations and complications. But something in me refused to surrender. "No," I said firmly. "If we elope, she wins. She'll tell everyone we couldn't manage without her, that our relationship wasn't strong enough to withstand challenges. I want to show her and myself that she's wrong." The next morning, I visited a bridal salon to pick up my altered dress, a vintage-inspired gown I'd found at a boutique for a fraction of the designer price my mother had expected me to pay. As I waited in the reception area, I heard a commotion from the fitting room area. A familiar voice was demanding to speak to the manager. My mother had somehow learned about my appointment and arrived before me. I slipped into a dressing room and texted the receptionist, explaining the situation. The kind young woman smuggled my dress out through the employee entrance while the manager kept my mother occupied with a fabricated story about computer errors. Later that day, I received a call from the salon owner, apologizing profusely. My mother had claimed to be helping me plan a surprise vow renewal for James's parents and needed to see what alterations would work for a woman of Diane's size and age. "She was very convincing," the owner admitted. "She knew so many details about your wedding. I changed my email passwords, created a new private Instagram account, and instructed our remaining vendors to verify identity with a code phrase before discussing our wedding with anyone." But the damage continued. Anonymous negative reviews appeared for our newly booked venue. The catering chef received complaints about food safety to the health department that required disruptive inspections. Our DJ's equipment was vandalized in his garage. This is insane, James said, after our wedding officiant withdrew following a mysterious job offer in another state. Your mother needs professional help. She's always been controlling, but this is different, I agreed. It's like she's obsessed with stopping us. My sister Megan provided unsettling insight. Mom's been having weekly strategy meetings with Aunt Helen and Uncle Stephen. They're calling it Operation Rescue Allison. Rescue me from what? Happiness? Independence? From making what she calls a catastrophic mistake that will ruin the Hartley legacy, Megan explained. She's convinced herself this is tough love, not sabotage. The pressure was taking its toll on me physically. I developed insomnia, waking at 3 a.m. with panic attacks. I lost weight. Dark circles formed under my eyes. At work, my concentration suffered as I constantly anticipated the next crisis. James suggested we postpone the wedding for my health. We'll get married when things settle down, he urged. Your well-being matters more than any timeline. His concern only strengthened my resolve. That's exactly what she wants for me to break under pressure. I won't give her that satisfaction. The turning point came unexpectedly. While searching for new vendors, I discovered that James' ex-girlfriend from college, Sarah, now ran a wedding planning business specializing in non-traditional ceremonies. We shouldn't contact her, James said uncomfortably. It would be awkward. Why did you break up? I asked, realizing I'd never questioned their history. Nothing dramatic. We wanted different futures. She was creative, independent-minded. I was still following my parents' expectations of a stable career path. We just grew apart. Something clicked. She sounds exactly like who we need right now. Despite James's reservations, I reached out to Sarah, explaining our situation candidly. To our surprise, she responded with enthusiasm. I specialize in what I call resilience weddings, she explained when we met. Celebrations that happen despite obstacles, family disapproval, financial setbacks, health crises. Your mother's campaign is extreme, but not unique in principle. Sarah's experience with challenging wedding scenarios proved invaluable. She recommended vendors known for discretion and suggested security measures we hadn't considered. Most importantly, she introduced a strategy of controlled information telling different vendors slightly different dates or details, creating a network of misinformation that would make it harder for my mother to target everyone. We'll create a decoy wedding, Sarah explained. Let information leak about a vineyard ceremony while actually planning for the botanical garden. Your mother can't sabotage what she can't find. The strategy required compartmentalizing information, even among friends and family. Only James, Megan, and I knew all the actual details. Everyone else received partial information on a need-to-know basis. Our luck seemed to be turning when my father requested another meeting. This time, he wasn't alone. My Aunt Patricia joined us, along with my grandmother. Your mother has gone too far, Aunt Patricia stated flatly. We've tried reasoning with her, but she's convinced herself this crusade is justified. Barbara was always stubborn, my grandmother added, but this behavior is concerning everyone. Did you know she's been calling James's firm's clients with vague concerns about project management? I hadn't known, and the information made my blood run cold. James hadn't mentioned this latest attack on his professional reputation. My father looked haggard. I've tried to moderate her actions, Allison, but she's beyond listening. She's now threatening to contest my position as CEO if I don't support her efforts to, how did she put it, bring you to your senses. The family is splitting into factions, Aunt Patricia explained. Those supporting Barbara's right to protect you, and those of us who recognize this as dangerous, controlling behavior. We're here because we think you should know what you're facing, my grandmother said gently, and to tell you that not everyone in the family agrees with her methods or goals. I've moved out, my father admitted quietly. I'm staying at the club for now. I just couldn't be part of this anymore. The revelation stunned me. My father had never directly opposed my mother in 35 years of marriage. Does she know about this meeting? I asked. God, no, Aunt Patricia said. She'd see it as the ultimate betrayal. But we're worried about her, Allison. This obsession with controlling your life isn't healthy for anyone. What should I do? I asked, feeling the weight of responsibility not just for my wedding, but for my family's fracturing. Live your life, my grandmother said simply. Make your choices. Barbara needs to face the reality that she cannot control adult children or anyone through manipulation and fear. The sooner that lesson comes, the better for everyone, including her. As I left the meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from James. Need to talk as soon as possible. Someone broke into my email. All wedding communications compromised. I hurried home, my mind racing. My mother's determination to stop our wedding had crossed into potentially illegal territory. The stress was affecting our health, our work, our relationship with family and friends. Yet surrendering felt impossible not just because of pride, but because I understood now that this battle was about something far more significant than a wedding. It was about the right to self-determination, about breaking generational patterns of control and manipulation, about creating a foundation for our marriage based on mutual support rather than external approval. That night, as James and I created new email accounts and passwords, I made a decision that would change everything. We need a completely different approach, I told him. One my mother would never expect from her always compliant daughter. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night, my mind clear with purpose. My mother had taught me how to strategize and manage appearances my entire life. Now I would use those lessons against her, not in malice, but in self-defense. The wedding would happen not despite my mother's interference, but because of the strength it had forced me to discover in myself. The next morning, I texted our inner circle. Emergency meeting tonight. Location texted separately. No social media. No discussions with anyone outside the group. I deliberately used language that sounded dramatic, exactly what someone would report to my mother if our circle was still compromised. We gathered in the back room of a small coffee shop owned by James's college friend Derek. I'd never met Derek before, which made the location perfect, no connection to our regular haunts or social media check-ins. Our core team assembled, James and I, Megan, Sarah the wedding planner, James' parents, and my Aunt Patricia. These were the only people we now trusted completely. Thank you for coming, I began, distributing sealed envelopes. Inside each envelope is a different piece of information about our wedding. Some of it is accurate, some isn't. Don't open your envelope yet, and don't share its contents with anyone else in this room. Everyone exchanged confused glances. We're going to create a misinformation campaign, I explained. My mother has informants everywhere, but she can't act on information if she doesn't know what's real and what's fake. Sarah nodded appreciatively. Controlled chaos. I like it. From now on, if asked about our wedding, you'll share only the information in your envelope, presented as if it's the complete truth. The goal is to create so many conflicting stories that my mother can't effectively target anything. You're fighting fire with fire, Aunt Patricia observed with a hint of admiration. Barbara won't expect this from you. I learned from the best, I replied. My mother trained me to manage perceptions my entire life. Now I'm using those skills to protect something that matters to me. The strategy was comprehensive. We created multiple wedding registries at stores we had no intention of using. We reserved blocks of rooms at hotels miles from our actual venue. We scheduled consultations with vendors we didn't plan to hire, making sure they had connections to my mother's social circle. What about your actual vendors? James's father asked practically. They're still vulnerable to pressure. That's phase 2, I explained. We're creating legally binding confidentiality agreements with financial penalties for information leaks. Sarah has connections with vendors who've handled high-profile or celebrity events and understand discretion. I've also reached out to colleagues who handle weddings for couples with stalker concerns, Sarah added. The security protocols are similar. It felt strange to be treating my mother as a threat requiring security measures, but her behavior had left us no choice. The next stage of our plan involved a direct intervention. Aunt Patricia arranged a family meeting, ostensibly to discuss my grandmother's estate planning, ensuring my mother would attend. The real purpose was to confront her behavior publicly. I wasn't present, but Megan recorded the meeting with everyone's consent except my mother's. Watching the video later was both satisfying and heartbreaking. Barbara, my grandmother, began firmly. Your obsession with controlling Allison's wedding has gone too far. The family is concerned about your behavior. My mother's perfectly composed face registered brief surprise before settling into righteous indignation. I'm protecting my daughter from a catastrophic mistake. You'll all thank me when she comes to her senses. Hiring private investigators? Threatening vendors? Spreading rumors about James's character? This isn't protection, Barbara. It's persecution, Aunt Patricia countered. One by one, family members expressed concern about her actions. My father, showing unexpected backbone, detailed the emotional toll her campaign had taken on everyone involved. Even my usually compliant Uncle William admitted her methods had become extreme. My mother remained unmoved. None of you understand what's at stake. The Hartley name means something in this city. I won't let Allison throw away generations of social position for some romantic fantasy with a man who's using her for connections. Barbara, my grandmother said quietly, you need help. Professional help. This isn't healthy behavior. Don't be ridiculous, Mother. I'm the only one thinking clearly. The intervention failed to change my mother's mind, but it accomplished something significant. It publicly exposed her behavior and united much of the family against her methods, if not her underlying concerns. Meanwhile, I focused on my own healing. The months of stress and conflict had taken a toll on my mental health. At James's urging, I started seeing Dr. Karen Chen, a therapist specializing in family dynamics and controlling relationships. What you're describing is a pattern of narcissistic control, Dr. Chen explained during our third session. Your mother sees you as an extension of herself, rather than an autonomous individual. Will she ever accept my choices? I asked. That depends on whether she can adjust her self-image to accommodate your independence. Some controlling parents eventually adapt when they realize control isn't possible. Others double down. And which category does my mother fall into? Dr. Chen smiled sympathetically. I think you already know the answer to that. The therapy helped me understand the patterns that had shaped my life, how I'd been conditioned to seek approval rather than happiness, to prioritize others' expectations over my own desires. Most importantly, it helped me recognize that my mother's behavior reflected her issues, not my worth. James was going through his own process of growth. His initial instinct to protect me by suggesting postponement had evolved into unwavering support for whatever path I chose. I realized I was doing what your mother does, trying to manage your decisions rather than supporting your agency, he admitted. I'm sorry for that. You were concerned about my well-being, I countered. That's different from control. Still, I want to be a partner, not a protector. You're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, Allison. Including me, sometimes. Our relationship deepened through the crisis. The superficial compatibility that had initially attracted us, shared interests, similar values, was now reinforced by genuine partnership in adversity. We were building something my parents had never had, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than strategic advantage. Two significant developments strengthened our position. First, my father officially separated from my mother, moving from the club into his own apartment. The news sent shockwaves through their social circle and temporarily diverted my mother's attention from our wedding to her own marriage crisis. Second, Megan discovered that my mother had been accessing my bank records through a family friend at my bank, a clear privacy violation. With Aunt Patricia's help, we documented the breach and filed a formal complaint, resulting in the friend's suspension pending investigation. Your mother's losing allies, Aunt Patricia observed. People are seeing the extremes she's willing to go to and distancing themselves. The wedding plans progressed under our new security protocols. We selected a beautiful botanical garden for the ceremony, with the reception at an adjoining conservatory. Both venues had experience with security concerns and implemented strict access controls. Sarah connected us with vendors who took confidentiality seriously, many with experience handling celebrity events where privacy was paramount. Our contracts included non-disclosure agreements with substantial penalties. As a final security measure, we created a need-to-know information system. Only James and I knew all the details. Everyone else received only the information essential for their role, delivered just in time to minimize risk of leaks. The misinformation campaign bore unexpected fruit when my mother appeared at the Four Seasons to confront our supposed cake tasting an appointment we'd deliberately leaked. The hotel's management, warned in advance, politely but firmly escorted her from the premises when she became disruptive. Similar scenarios played out at a bridal shop where we had no appointment and a photographer's studio we'd never contracted. Each wild goose chase wasted my mother's time and resources while our actual preparations proceeded undisturbed. "She's getting desperate," Megan reported after a tense family dinner. "She's talking about hiring a lawyer to stop the wedding on grounds that you're making decisions under duress or undue influence." The threat was laughable given the circumstances, but it confirmed my mother was running out of options. Her usual tactics of social pressure and manipulation were failing against our new strategy of security and misinformation. The wedding was now just 3 weeks away. Invitations had been sent to a carefully vetted guest list, people we trusted not to leak details to my mother. Our vendors were confirmed and briefed on security protocols. The ceremony and reception details were finalized. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel hopeful. We were going to pull this off despite everything my mother had thrown at us. More importantly, I had discovered a strength and resilience I never knew I possessed. "You're not the same person who walked out of that engagement dinner," James observed one night as we reviewed security arrangements. "No, I'm not," I agreed. "I'm better, stronger, more me." The final test of our new strategy came unexpectedly. My mother somehow obtained my cell phone number despite multiple changes. Her message was simple. "I know you're getting married on the 15th at Westfield Gardens. One last chance to reconsider before I'm forced to take more direct action." James and I looked at each other, then burst into laughter. Westfield Gardens was one of our decoy venues, information deliberately planted through a distant cousin we suspected of reporting to my mother. "She took the bait," James said, relief evident in his voice. "Now we just have to maintain security for the real date and location," I replied, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, we had the upper hand. My mother had taught me strategy and perception management my entire life, never imagining I would one day use those lessons to outmaneuver her. The wedding would happen on our terms, and more importantly, I was finally creating a life on my terms, a gift far more valuable than any wedding could ever be. Dawn broke clear and perfect on our wedding day. I stood by the window of the bridal suite at the Botanical Gardens historic guest house, watching sunlight filter through ancient oak trees. After months of stress and subterfuge, the day had finally arrived. "Nervous?" Megan asked, appearing beside me with a steaming mug of coffee. "Strangely, no," I replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "I feel peaceful." It was true. The chaos of the past months had burned away any anxiety about centerpieces or playlist selections. What remained was absolute certainty about marrying James. Everything else was just details. Our security measures were in place. The botanical garden was closed to the public for a special maintenance day. Security personnel discreetly positioned at entrances checked guest identification against our list. The vendors had arrived through the service entrance, their vehicles unmarked. My bridal party consisted only of Megan and James's sister Kate, people we trusted completely. Our original larger wedding party had been scaled back for security purposes, with those friends understanding the circumstances and supporting our decision. As the makeup artist finished her work, Megan squeezed my hand. "Mom still doesn't know. The decoy at Westfield Gardens is working. She's positioned spies there all morning." I smiled at the image of my mother's informants waiting at an empty venue. "Let's hope it stays that way." An hour before the ceremony, Sarah burst into the bridal suite, her usual calm demeanor visibly shaken. "We have a situation. Your mother's discovered the real location. Security just turned her away at the main entrance. My stomach dropped. How did she find out? We're not sure yet. But she was making scenes, demanding to be let in. She mentioned having evidence that would stop the wedding. James appeared in the doorway, having been summoned by Sarah. What do you want to do, Allie? We can delay the start time, increase security. I took a deep breath, considering our options. After months of my mother's interference, this final attempt felt almost inevitable. No, we stick to the schedule. She's trying to disrupt our day by any means possible. I won't give her that power. She's still outside the gates, Sarah warned. Making calls, looking determined. Let her stay there, I decided. We've prepared for this. Everyone who matters is already inside. Sarah nodded, impressed by my resolve. I'll inform security to maintain their positions and deny her entry under any circumstances. As she left to handle the situation, James approached me cautiously. Are you really okay with this? She's still your mother. I met his concerned gaze steadily. Yes, she's my mother, and I'll always love her. But this day is about us choosing each other, not about her inability to let go of control. He pulled me into a gentle hug, careful of my dress and makeup. You're incredible, you know that? Most people would be falling apart. I did my falling apart months ago. I reminded him with a small smile. Today, I'm just a bride marrying the man she loves. As my bridesmaids made final adjustments to my dress, a vintage-inspired gown with delicate lace that cost a fraction of what my mother would have deemed appropriate, a knock came at the door. My father stood there, looking uncertain but determined in his tuxedo. May I come in? The room fell silent. My father hadn't confirmed whether he would attend, caught between loyalty to my mother and support for me. His presence was a pleasant surprise, but complicated emotions. Dad, I acknowledged, neither welcoming nor rejecting him. You look beautiful, he said softly, like your grandmother on her wedding day. Megan and Kate discreetly slipped out, giving us privacy. I wasn't sure you'd come, I admitted. I almost didn't, he confessed. Your mother. She's making quite a scene at the entrance. I heard. He shifted uncomfortably. She's threatening to contest our separation agreement if I participate in the ceremony. My heart sank. Even now, my mother was issuing ultimatums, using every lever of control at her disposal. I understand if you need to leave. No, you don't understand, he said with unexpected firmness. I'm here to walk my daughter down the aisle. I should have stood up to your mother years ago for Megan, for you, for myself. I failed all of us by enabling her behavior. Tears threatened my carefully applied makeup. Dad, let me finish, he insisted gently. I've spent my life avoiding conflict with your mother, telling myself it was easier to give in than fight. But all I did was help her build a fortress of control around our family. I won't miss this moment, Allison. Not for anything. The significance of his stand wasn't lost on me. After decades of acquiescence, my father was finally choosing courage over compliance. Thank you, I whispered, embracing him carefully. There's something else you should know, he added, pulling back. Your mother has discovered the real wedding location because someone on the inside told her. Who? I asked, alarm rising. Me, he admitted. I told her last night. Before I could react with anger or betrayal, he continued quickly. I also told her that if she disrupted your wedding in any way, I would immediately file for divorce and contest every asset we've built together over 35 years. My jaw dropped. My father had never directly challenged my mother in such a fundamental way. I've consulted divorce attorneys secretly for weeks, he explained. I have documentation of her behavior, witness statements, evidence of her harassment campaign. Your mother understands money and status above all else, so I made the consequences of her actions financially devastating. For the first time, I saw my father not as my mother's shadow, but as a man finding his strength after years of suppression. Will it work? He shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. But it's the first time in our marriage I've set a boundary with real consequences. Whatever happens, I needed to do this for you and for myself. A knock at the door signaled it was time for the ceremony to begin. My father offered his arm. "Shall we?" As we took our positions at the garden entrance, I glimpsed my mother through the wrought iron gates, standing beside her idling car, watching from a distance. Our eyes met briefly across the divide, hers burning with a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps loss. For a moment, I felt a stab of sadness for what might have been if she could have accepted my choices. Then the music began, and I turned toward the future I had chosen. James waited beneath an arch of wildflowers, his face lighting up as I appeared. Beside him stood his parents, who had shown me what unconditional support truly looked like. Our gathered friends and family, the ones who had stood by us through the chaos, rose to witness our commitment. My father squeezed my arm gently as we began our walk. "I'm proud of you, Allison. Not for who you're marrying or what you've achieved, but for finding the courage to be yourself despite everything." Those words, approval based on authenticity rather than achievement, were the wedding gift I had never expected but needed most. The ceremony unfolded with a beauty and simplicity that perfectly reflected our journey. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promises not just of love but of partnership and mutual respect. When James slipped the ring on my finger, a vintage piece we'd found together, rather than the family diamond my mother had intended I should have, I felt the symbolic completion of my break from expectation into choice. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," our officiant declared to applause and cheers. As we turned to face our guests as a married couple, I noticed a commotion near the garden entrance. The security guards were speaking into their radios, looking concerned. Sarah hurried over during our first moments of greeting guests. "Your mother's gone," she whispered. "Just drove away suddenly. Security says she got a phone call, then left immediately." I felt a momentary concern, wondering what had prompted her departure, but refused to let it overshadow our celebration. "Good. Let's enjoy our day." The reception unfolded in the garden conservatory, string lights twinkling overhead as dusk fell. Our first dance, to an acoustic version of the song that had been playing during James's proposal, felt like coming full circle from that authentic, unplanned moment in his kitchen to this celebration we had fought so hard to create. During his toast, James acknowledged the journey that had brought us to this day. "Some couples plan their weddings around color schemes or themes," he said, raising his glass. "Allison and I planned ours around authenticity and independence. Every detail you see today represents not just our taste, but our commitment to creating a life on our own terms." He turned to me, his eyes filled with emotion. "Allison, you've shown more courage and resilience in these past months than most people demonstrate in a lifetime. I'm in awe of the woman you've become, or perhaps always were, beneath the expectations others placed on you. I'm the luckiest man alive to be your partner." My father's speech surprised everyone with its emotional honesty. "I've spent decades watching my daughter strive for perfection to earn approval," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Today, I watched her achieve something far greater, the strength to define happiness on her own terms. James, thank you for supporting Allison and becoming her true self. That's the greatest gift any parent could ask for their child, though some of us take too long to realize it." The not-so-subtle reference to my mother hung in the air, but instead of creating tension, it felt like a necessary acknowledgement of the journey that had brought us here. As the celebration continued, I found myself surrounded by people who had stood by us through the storm, friends who had kept secrets, family members who had chosen sides, vendors who had maintained confidentiality despite pressure. This was the community we had built, not through social position or family connection, but through authentic bonds of loyalty and support. Near midnight, as the reception wound down, James pulled me aside. "There's something you should know," he said quietly. "Your father just got a call. Your mother's in the hospital." My breath caught. "What happened?" "Nothing life-threatening," he assured me quickly. "Apparently, after leaving here, she went home and had some kind of anxiety attack. The housekeeper called an ambulance." Complex emotions washed over me: concern, guilt, a twinge of vindication I wasn't proud of. Should we? Your father's handling it, James said. He doesn't want you to cut short your wedding day, but he thought you should know. I nodded, processing the information. My mother's collapse felt symbolic, somehow the ultimate admission that she couldn't control the narrative anymore. For the first time, I felt genuine compassion for her, without the accompanying guilt and obligation. Thank you for telling me, I said. I'll call tomorrow to check on her. James studied my face. Are you okay? I considered the question seriously. Yes, I am. I hope she's all right, but her health crisis doesn't change our boundaries. That's what healthy love looks like: concern without capitulation. He smiled, pulling me close. When did you get so wise? When I had to fight for the right to choose my own happiness, I replied, resting my head on his shoulder as we swayed gently to the music still playing in the background. As our guests prepared for our departure, I found myself filled with unexpected peace. The wedding had happened despite every obstacle. More importantly, I had discovered myself through the process of fighting for it. The day marked not just our marriage, but my emergence as a woman who knew her own mind and had the courage to stand by her convictions. We ran through a shower of lavender tossed by our friends and family, laughing as we ducked into the vintage car that would take us to our honeymoon suite. As we pulled away, I caught a final glimpse of the botanical garden illuminated against the night sky, a beautiful setting for a beautiful day, hard-won, and therefore all the more precious. Ready for what comes next? James asked, squeezing my hand. I smiled, thinking of all we had overcome to reach this moment. Absolutely. After this, I think we can handle anything. Whatever challenges awaited us in married life, we would face them as we had faced my mother's opposition together, with determination and the unshakable knowledge that we had chosen each other freely, against all odds. That, I realized, was the true gift hidden within my mother's ultimatum, the opportunity to prove, to myself and to the world, exactly what I was made of. 6 months after our wedding, James and I stood in our new apartment, unpacking the last of our boxes. We'd found a charming 2-bedroom in a converted industrial building, not the luxury condo my parents would have expected, but a space that genuinely reflected our taste and priorities. I can't believe we've been married half a year already, I said, hanging a framed photo from our wedding day, a candid shot capturing us laughing during the reception, surrounded by friends who had become our chosen family. Best 6 months of my life, James replied, wrapping his arms around me from behind. Despite everything, the everything he referred to encompassed the continuing aftermath of my confrontation with my mother. The day after our wedding, I had called the hospital as promised, only to be told by my father that my mother refused to speak to me. Her anxiety attack had been diagnosed as a stress response, and she had been released with a recommendation for therapy advice she promptly ignored. In the months since, I had maintained limited contact with her through carefully worded emails and occasional family gatherings where we maintained a cool civility. She had never apologized for her behavior or acknowledged the harm she had caused. Instead, she had retreated into a narrative where she was the victim of an ungrateful daughter's rebellion. Have you read your father's email? James asked, pulling me back to the present. I nodded. My father had committed to therapy following the wedding, working to understand his role in enabling my mother's controlling behavior. His weekly sessions had gradually expanded to include meetings with Megan and me, separately at first, then together. He wants to try family therapy, I said, with all of us. Including your mother? That's the plan. Though I doubt she'll agree. James considered this thoughtfully. And how do you feel about it, after everything she did? It was a fair question. My mother's campaign against our wedding had left deep scars, not just on our relationship, but on my sense of self-worth and family identity. Dr. Chen had helped me understand that my mother's behavior stemmed from her own insecurities and need for control, not from any inherent deficiency in me or James. Still, intellectual understanding didn't automatically heal emotional wounds. I think I'm ready, I said finally. Not to forget or excuse what she did, but to try understanding why she did it. Dr. Chen says that's different from forgiveness. My therapy journey had been transformative. Weekly sessions with Dr. Chen had helped me identify patterns of people-pleasing and validation-seeking that had defined my life before meeting James. I'd learned to recognize my mother's voice in my head, the constant critic measuring my choices against external standards of success and propriety. "You've come so far," James observed, picking up another wedding photo to hang. This one showed me dancing with my father, his face reflecting a mixture of joy and regret. "Remember when you used to check with me 3 times before making any decision?" I laughed, remembering how early in our relationship I'd been paralyzed by simple choices like where to eat dinner, having been conditioned to seek approval rather than express preferences. I was a mess. "You were finding your voice," he corrected gently. "And now look at you starting your own business, setting boundaries with your family, making decisions without second-guessing yourself." The business he referred to was my fledgling wedding planning service, specializing in what I called authentic celebrations, helping couples create weddings that reflected their values rather than external expectations. My experience navigating family dynamics and budget constraints had proven surprisingly marketable. My sister Megan had been an unexpected source of support in this venture, designing my website and marketing materials. Our shared experience of breaking free from our mother's control had transformed our once distant relationship into a genuine friendship. "How's Megan's exhibition coming along?" James asked, as if reading my thoughts. "She's nervous but excited. Having her photography featured in an actual gallery is huge." I smiled, thinking of my sister's journey. "You know, she told me last week that watching me stand up to Mom gave her the courage to really commit to her art instead of pursuing the practical career Mom always pushed for." "The Hartley sisters, breaking the mold," James teased, but his pride was evident. Our conversation was interrupted by a call from my father, his name lighting up my phone screen. Since moving into his own apartment, he had discovered texting, video calls, and the freedom to maintain relationships with his daughters independent of my mother's oversight. "Dad, hi. We were just talking about family therapy," I said after greeting him. "That's actually why I'm calling," he replied, his voice cautious. "Your mother has agreed to attend. 1 session, no commitments beyond that." I sat down, stunned. After months of refusing to acknowledge any problem, this small concession felt monumental. What changed her mind? "The Pierpont's daughter just got engaged to her girlfriend," he explained, referencing close friends of my mother's. "Apparently Martha Pierpont is handling it with grace and enthusiasm, hosting an engagement party at the club next month. Your mother, I think she's realizing her reaction to your choice has isolated her socially in a way she didn't anticipate." It was so typical of my mother that her motivation stemmed from social comparison rather than genuine self-reflection, but I chose to focus on the opportunity rather than her reasons. "When is the session?" "Next Thursday at 4, Dr. Larson's office downtown." After confirming the details, I hung up and shared the news with James, who responded with cautious optimism. "It's a start. Just remember what Dr. Chen said about managing expectations." "I know. This isn't going to be some Hallmark movie reconciliation scene. But it's a step," he acknowledged. "And 6 months ago, even this seemed impossible." That night, as I prepared for bed, I found myself studying our wedding photos again. There was a particular image I returned to often, not the perfectly composed group shots or even our first dance, but a candid moment captured during the reception. In it, I was laughing with James's mother Diane, our heads bent close together over some shared joke. My face in that photo reflected something I had rarely experienced growing up, the uninhibited joy of being fully accepted for exactly who I was. The contrast between that moment and my relationship with my own mother was stark and painful. Yet within that pain lay a valuable lesson about the kind of person and potentially the kind of parent I wanted to be. The family therapy session the following Thursday was predictably tense. My mother arrived impeccably dressed and composed, as if attending a business meeting rather than a healing session. My father, sister, and I exchanged nervous glances as Dr. Larson established ground rules for our conversation. "This is a space for honest communication without judgment," she explained. "Everyone will have a chance to speak and be heard." When it was my mother's turn to share, she surprised me by admitting, "I may have overreacted to Allison's engagement. My methods were perhaps excessive." It wasn't exactly an apology, but from a woman who had never acknowledged error in her entire life, it was significant. Why was it so important to control who I married? I asked when given the opportunity, the question that had haunted me for months. My mother's perfectly manicured hands tightened around her purse. "I wanted to protect you from making a mistake." "But why did you see James as a mistake?" She hesitated, then spoke with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "My own mother came from nothing. She worked as a housekeeper before marrying my father, who was from a good family. She spent her entire life being subtly reminded that she didn't truly belong in their social circle. I watched how she was treated, the whispers, the exclusions, the condescension barely hidden beneath politeness. I didn't want that for you." The revelation stunned me. I had never heard this family history, never known this insecurity lurked beneath my mother's perfect facade. "But James isn't marrying into a social circle. He's marrying me." "Social realities don't disappear because you ignore them, Allison." "Maybe not," I acknowledged. "But they only control us if we let them." The session continued with moments of tension, fleeting connection, and painful honesty. By the end, nothing was resolved in the traditional sense. My mother hadn't suddenly transformed into a warm, supportive parent. But something had shifted, a crack had appeared in the wall between us, allowing at least the possibility of a different kind of relationship. As the months passed, that possibility slowly, incrementally, became reality. My mother agreed to continue therapy, though she insisted on individual sessions rather than family counseling. We began a careful dance of redefined boundaries, my asserting independence, her learning, reluctantly, to accept it. Our first real breakthrough came unexpectedly at Thanksgiving, when she asked about my wedding planning business. "Megan showed me your website," she admitted. "It's impressive how you've created something from nothing." Coming from her, it was high praise. "Thank you. That means a lot." "I still think you're undercharging," she added, unable to resist critiquing. "Your service is premium and should be priced accordingly." I laughed, recognizing the familiar controlling impulse, but choosing to see the concern beneath it. "I'll consider that when I review my rates next quarter." She nodded, satisfied to have been heard, if not obeyed. It was a small exchange, but it represented a new pattern, her offering input rather than demands, me acknowledging without automatically complying. My relationship with my father flourished in ways I'd never imagined possible. Freed from my mother's domination, he revealed interests and perspectives I'd never known. He possessed a love of jazz music, an interest in architectural history, a dry sense of humor. We began monthly dinners, just the two of us, building the relationship we should have had all along. "I've been a coward most of my life," he confessed during one such dinner. "Watching you stand up to your mother showed me what courage really looks like." James and I settled into married life with a freedom and authenticity that felt like a daily victory. We made decisions based on our values rather than external expectations. We built friendships with people who supported our choices rather than questioned them. We created a home that reflected our taste rather than social aspiration. 1 year after our wedding, we gathered with friends and family, including, remarkably, my mother, to celebrate our anniversary. As I looked around at the diverse group of people who had supported our journey, I felt profound gratitude for the unexpected gift hidden within my mother's ultimatum. By saying, "We're not funding this circus," she had inadvertently forced me to discover who I truly was beyond the perfect daughter role I'd played my entire life. The financial support she had withdrawn was nothing compared to the self-determination I had gained in exchange. In the quiet moment before cutting our anniversary cake, James squeezed my hand. Any regrets? He whispered. I looked at my mother, standing awkwardly at the periphery of the celebration, still learning, still struggling, but present nonetheless. I thought of the painful journey that had brought us all to this moment, the relationships destroyed and rebuilt, the difficult lessons learned. Not a single one, I replied truthfully. Everything that happened led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear. My mother and I would likely never have the easy, affectionate relationship I witnessed between James and Diane. The damage was too deep, the patterns too ingrained. But we were finding a new way to exist in each other's lives with clearer boundaries, greater honesty, and mutual respect, if not always understanding. And I had discovered something invaluable along the way, that authentic happiness comes not from meeting others' expectations, but from having the courage to define success on your own terms. That lesson alone was worth every painful moment of the journey. What about you? Have you ever had to stand up to family pressure to follow your own path? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more real-life journeys, and share with someone who might need to know they're not alone in facing family challenges. Thank you for coming along on this journey with me. Remember, sometimes the most beautiful futures are born from the most difficult choices. Wishing you the courage to create a life that's authentically yours, whatever that may look like.